We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, and welcome to it. It's Monday, February 23rd, 2026, and today we're going to be talking about the people problem, the people who are in charge, the people who are messaging, and then the people who are supposed to be on the receiving end of that messaging. Got a problem with all y'all, folks, so we're going to get into it, and that will be in the form of a list of wins that came out on social media from the former co-deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino. Also, Americans seem to really love big government, but they can't afford to buy cars and haven't been able to make that connection yet. The FBI is changing its hiring practices. An immigration fraudster was just caught working in law enforcement, and we will wrap it up with a good story about a real cop being a cop, because he is not a problem. He's one of the few good ones. So let's get after it. The people are the problem. What does that mean? Well, I mean, you can assign and prescribe guilt to those who are in charge, those people who are within the apparatuses of our government, who through our social compact, the American people, have given certain levels of power in return for certain expectations, certain demands and charges of them. And we got problems with them all across the board. Lots of failures that we like to cover down on here on the AmRad pod. But there's also a problem of the receiving end, because people get elected to office or they get appointed, they're bureaucrats, they really want to make sure that they're continuing to ascend the ladder of success. Maybe they're being held in really high esteem. They just need to message it to the people. And unfortunately, all too often, people just really want to wave pom-poms and hand out gold stars and helmet stickers and say, everything is good now. We don't really have to use any sort of common sense or analyze the information that's being put out there. So the recipients of the spin are the problem just as well. And the people in charge kind of know that. So I saw this come out over the weekend on social media, where people tend to be nowadays, people who are within government power or formerly in government power, and using that former post to give some sort of a claim to having intellectual prowess. On top of that, some in the know aspects. So who am I talking about? I'm talking about the former co-deputy director of the FBI, the Podfather, as he likes to call himself. Now, no, that's not really true, but Dan Bongino. He wanted to come out against the black pillars and the panicans and say, look at all the victories, so why don't you just shut the bleep up? And I'll leave that part out, which he made sure to include. But he had a long list of wins. And he said, quote, did you ever notice that there's some people constantly talking about noticing, never seem to notice all of the incredible things happening in the country right now? It's as if they have an agenda. And that agenda is most definitely not your agenda. So he doesn't have a thesaurus. He doesn't know that there are other words he could use other than the word notice or agenda. But he makes a point and then kind of owns himself on it, because he says they have an agenda. Well, sir, you have an agenda. But he lists out, I believe it's somewhere in the area of 13. No, actually, it's 16 facts that he says, look, why don't you give us all the attaboys that you got, because we're doing so awesome. And he says we, because he still believes that he's part of the administration, because he's doing the PR spin here. Well, the people are the problem. The guys spinning are the problem. And those who are just sort of imbibing it and accepting it as truth are the problem as well. So I looked at the different facts that former co-deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, put out there, and I want to call balls and strikes. Some of them are true. Most of them aren't. Let's work our way through as we talk about the people being the problem. The first one, illegal border crossings are at a historic low. Objectively true if we actually accept the information being put forth by our federal government. And I'm not part of that, so I kind of have to take their word for it. Okay, we'll give you that one. You have sealed the hole in the boat, but I can't help but notice that you're not talking about mass deportations at any point in this list of over a dozen facts. Why would that be? Oh, because we're not doing mass deportations? The things that the American people voted in mass for in 2024 and sent a mandate and elected Donald Trump on the understanding that we were going to do mass deportations of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens. And that just hasn't happened. Instead, we're getting Tom Homan going at the lectern and saying, we'll withdraw here, Dunkirk style. We're going to go with a soft touch, only the worst offenders, and everybody else will just be allowed to remain in the melting pot. So I don't even give you full credit because you wouldn't go all the way there. Yes, you've sealed off the hole in the boat, but you haven't bailed out any water, or the little bit that you have hasn't really made a dent. Second fact, GDP growth is strong despite the Democrat shutdown. Spare me on who's to blame for the government shutdowns, which party. They like to assign it one side and to the other side. But in the end, if you're a small r Republican constitutional form of government person, you don't have a problem with the government shutdown. So if you want to make it about politics, I'm not here for that. I want to talk about GDP, gross domestic product. GDP is the sum total of all goods and services flowing around the economy. Did you know that there's a quarter of that comes from the government, the federal government? It's over a third that comes from total government spending, and that includes state and municipal governments as well. But just from a federal government standpoint, all the money that flows out there, one quarter of it, 25 cents of every dollar comes from the government, which means that those are dollars that were stolen, I mean taxed, from your citizens and redistributed to other citizens, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Or they were dollars that were printed out of thin air, causing the dollars in your bank account to become worth less and worth less until they become worthless. Or they were borrowed on the backs of your children and grandchildren so that we could have a really great GDP. Spare me. Fact number 3, inflation is down dramatically. So a quarter of the spending out there, a lot of it is from the government printing money, which has caused inflation, which has necessitated the Trump administration coming up with this new term called disinflation, not deflation, where the dollars actually become more valuable, where you would have greater overall buying power. Disinflation means that you're still getting fat, just not quite as quickly as you were before. I mean, the last few years, you put on 20 pounds a year, 25 the next year, 15 the following year. Now you only put on 5 pounds. You didn't lose any of the weight you already put on. You didn't even stay the same weight. You still got fatter. The wear and tear on the inner organs and the musculature that you have is still happening. But congratulations, America. You're not getting fatter at quite a rapid rate. Not really a good fact to point out there. But the people are the problem, because people could pump their fists and say, look, we don't have Bidenflation anymore. Things are awesome. Unless, of course, you go to the grocery store and realize that you're paying more today than you were 6 months ago. Who was in charge 6 months ago? That's an inconvenient fact that I'm noticing, Mr. Bongino. Let's keep working our way through this. He mentions mortgage rates are the lowest in years. Well, how low? Really, and let's compare it across years. So, I mean, it's really not that hard nowadays to do an internet search, which I did, for a list of mortgage rates. And if you happen to be listening to us over at Spotify, which you can do at AmRadPod, you can join us. We're about 9 minutes into the show. And it's hard to see even if you're on YouTube at AmRadPod and on rumble.com/AmRadPod. You will see that this is a tracker of mortgage rates from 1975 to the present day. And if you actually drilled into it, mortgage rates reached the lowest that they've been in just 4 years. So hardly a historic note here. And if you actually want to go back through history into the early 1980s, you'll see that mortgage rates got to almost 20% versus now where they're at like 6. So it's not really the the level that it probably needs to be in order to bring the housing market into some semblance of a balance where people who are actually looking to sell their houses and benefit from the equity they've built up in them would be able to do that because, again, we have to keep mortgage rates down and overall interest rates down so that more money flows into the system. Otherwise, we'll have GDP problems. But inflation, we'll just call it disinflation. We don't really need to worry about the price of ground beef at Walmart. Jobless claims, the lower came in lower than expected. No specific number given by Dan Bongino on that one. Just lower than expected. They'll be revised to realize that they're actually higher, but that's what they do every single time. And that's not unique to the Trump administration. That's every single presidential administration. Every single month, the jobless claims come out, and then they wind up a couple weeks later revising and being like, it actually wasn't as good as we said. But again, I'll put up a visual. Let's see, what did jobless claims look like over the last 10 years? It's basically a flat line with the exception of 2020 when they told everybody to stay home and stay safe and not go to their non-essential job that they used to feed their family and pay their mortgage. Who was president in 2020? Oh, don't worry about that one, though. That's something that I noticed, Mr. Bongino. Keep drilling our way through this here. Again, the people are the problem. The Bonginos are the problem. The people in charge of the government are the problem. And then anybody who just accepts this and just swallows this nonsense is also a problem. We have the Iranian nuclear threat disabled. Then why are we doing saber rattling and putting naval resources near Iran? To go back after the nuclear threat that was already mitigated? So were you lying then or are you lying now? Guess I just noticed an inconsistency in the agenda, as they like to say. You have Maduro, who's in a U.S. prison. Did you know the United States government is still running Venezuela right now? Does that sound like it's America first to you? Does stealing their oil sound like piracy, or does it sound like America first? I don't know. I don't know what that's to brag about. We didn't have a declaration of war, and if you believe in the pesky, dusty document that we use to memorialize our social compact, and we have co-equal branches of government, I believe the executive is supposed to go to the legislature and ask for an act of war in order to depose somebody in a different country after having made the case that there's a threat to our way of life. I don't think Venezuela ever was. They certainly didn't have any military capability that allowed me to lose any minutes of sleep at night. We're the safest in U.S. history. No further information. Defined safe. I think that a growing national debt of $40 trillion and people's inability to afford basic essentials would put us in a pretty precarious position. But maybe you're talking about the crime, which he kind of doubles up on with another fact because he was trying to get a bigger overall list of facts. Because Dan Bongino says that murder and crime rates are the lowest in history. The federal government has nothing to do with murder unless it happens on a military base or an Indian reservation, which is not registering statistically in this country. And the crime rates being down, I guess you get partial credit because you tweeted out things like law and order. But I think Dan Bongino was on record as saying that those statistics are bunk because most of the large cities out there don't report to the federal government. So they don't have the information. They just put it in as a zero or they estimate what they think it is, which will help with the narrative they like put out there. They hope you don't notice how 30% of large police departments out there don't report crime stats to the FBI. Then we get some name checks, accountability. This is all about transparency, i.e. things we like, and accountability. Who are the names that Dan Bongino says are people who were held accountable? James Comey. Criminal charges were dropped on James Comey. Letitia James. Criminal charges never actually flew for Letitia James. Owen John Bolton, who was appointed by Donald Trump. So that's what you're hanging your hat on? You actually had the hubris to list James Comey and Letitia James as far as being accountable? They were not held accountable from my perspective. If you were interested in having people who committed crimes put in handcuffs, neither one of them saw a day in jail, and they're just ollie oxen free. In fact, Letitia James is pushing back on ICE right now because she's the Attorney General of New York State still. So spare me accountability. The Dow is at 50,000. There it is. What fact number is that? Oh, gosh. Fact number 11. So we're doing the Pam Bondi. The Dow's at 50,000. Well, the Dow's at 50,000 because a lot of the dollars going into the stock market right now are not worth what they were a few years ago. If you go back to pre-coronavirus spending, a dollar then would be worth $1.25 now. That's just how much our dollar was inflated by both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and certainly no effort to bring deflation in. So we're pumping the stock market full of dollars that aren't really worth that much. And on top of that, you've got about 7 big tech companies that are essentially the only ones who are growing. Everybody else has been stable, but that's an inconvenient fact they hope you don't notice because you might have an agenda, the agenda being to find out what's actually going on. A few more here, and then we can push off of it. The government workforce has shrunk by 10%. That's kind of inconvenient. 10%. So we're still at 90% workforce. It's about 3 million people working for the federal government. During a shutdown, how many of them have to stay home because they're non-essential? We had government shutdowns. How about if you didn't show up to work, you just never came back? That would have been the best way to do it. So I guess you get partial credit because a lot of people just left under the Trump administration. We still paid them out for the full year salary, but we didn't retain them. Again, partial credit. Red tape has been slashed. No further information. Bureaucracy still exists. Multiple peace deals. I thought we were a peacetime presidency. What's the threat out there that we need to sign a peace deal for? There's now threatening war in Iran. Has Ukraine and Russia stopped? I mean, I don't really care very much. It doesn't affect me, but I don't know what peace deals we're bragging about. And the US is the global leader in oil and gas production. So that's awesome. I mean, really good. I mean, we should be doing further exploration. We should be cutting back on red tape. We want to bring down those expenses. I mean, this is a unique time in history, according to Dan Bongino, for the United States to have ascended the ladder. We are now the world's biggest producer of oil and gas, except we have been for over a decade and a half. From theconversation.com headline, under both Trump and Biden-Harris, U.S. oil and gas production surged to record highs despite very different energy goals. So even under the Biden administration, where they wanted to do away with those dirty fossil fuels, the United States still retained its position as the preeminent producer of oil and gas on the planet, as we have been since the first year of Barack Obama's presidency. So that isn't new. One more. Tax cuts. That's the Republican thing. I mean, we're going to continue to spend oogles of money, $7 trillion, which 5 years ago, $4 trillion was too much. We've now almost doubled it. But we're going to give you tax cuts. So you're not paying for it at all, right? Like, you're getting more of a refund from the money that we stole from you. I mean, taxed you originally, withheld from your pay over the last year, and as an interest-free loan, we used it that entire time. But now we'll return some of it to you in the form of a tax cut. Meanwhile, we're spending so much money that the dollars in your bank account aren't worth anything anymore. So really, are you getting a cut in the amount that you have, or it's just a perceived cut when it really isn't? And really, where do Americans stand? So we can pivot away from the former co-deputy director of the FBI and his long list of facts that everybody should be noticing when actually, if you do any sort of discernment on it, you notice that it's completely full of crap. But let's talk about the people being the problem, the people who take that list and say, yeah, things are great. But people who just fail to do any sort of critical thinking and assessment on where things are right now. So this came out from Real Clear Polling. People are the problem. Headline: Americans want lower taxes and higher government spending. How is that possible? I'm not saying how is it possible that people want that, because everybody wants tax cuts and everybody wants government goodies. But how is it possible to tax people less, meaning you steal less of their money, and continue to spend more money? It's not mathematically possible, but the people are the problem because they believe it is. So the basic takeaways from this study from Real Clear Polling, some facts and figures. Americans want the federal government to increase spending on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and veterans. That's like half of our budget. It's like $3.5 trillion. But they really want to pull the belts tight on other things, like foreign aid. Look, I don't want any foreign aid at all. America only. I believe everybody in the AMRAD pod likely agrees with me, unless you're hate watching / listening. And if you are, make sure you give us a thumbs up. But foreign aid is less than 1%. But everybody else wants more welfare, more government handouts. The Americans want cuts to foreign aid and to ICE. Again, less than 1% of overall spending. When asked about government spending overall, 43% said they wanted it decreased. So 6 in 10 say keep spending more. 53%, though, want their taxes cut. So give me my goodies, just don't make me pay for it. The people are the problem. And the people are the problem to the extent that this creates the opportunity for government to expand into things that aren't part of our pesky, dusty document, the charges, the things that we memorialize in our social compact and demand and expect of our government to provide. We don't want anarchy, protection against fraud and force, defend our border, sign some treaties, even if we don't really care about what's going on overseas, coin some money. But when I say coin money, like actually create a system of ways and means. We don't want you just printing more and more money so you can spend it on things that aren't part of our pesky, dusty documents. But I guess they read more into that than they should have. Probably part of the good and plenty clause and invisible ink at the back of the Declaration of Independence. But what happens when the government is so removed from the populace and providing so many things that they shouldn't be? It creates a demand from the people. They want more government, and they expect the government to do things that it shouldn't. And then we just sit back and say, won't somebody do things that we should be doing for ourselves? So I saw a great example of that recently, and this came from New York City, which probably going to send a lot more people in our direction here in Florida, the land of milk and honey. We're woke and winter storms go to die. Guys, it was like 85 degrees over the weekend. People were getting sunburned. It got cold again, so my voice might be going away soon. But for today's purposes, it is back and better than ever. This is the mayor of New York City talking about winter storms that are going on there and the need for shoveling.
We're utilizing 33 DSNY vans and 2 DSNY buses to transport shovelers where they're needed faster. And for those who want to do more to help your neighbors and earn some extra cash, you too can become an emergency snow shoveler. Just show up at your local sanitation garage between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. tomorrow with your paperwork, which is accessible online at nyc.gov/snow, and you can get started right away.
Are you kidding me? The government of New York City is going to pay people to shovel the snow where they live? I mean, I don't live in a snowy environment anymore, but I did for almost a decade. And when it snowed, I went out and shoveled the snow. I didn't expect the taxpayers to front that. But what is the offer here? Because people who live in New York City, which is a communist-run municipality, they expect the government to provide those services because they're just a boiled frog at this point. They live and imbibe that communism nonstop. So why would I go and shovel my own walkway? Certainly the government should. I pay enough taxes. Somebody do something. Well, apparently New York City is offering people jobs to shovel snow for $19 an hour, 40 hours a week, full-time job, which would mean they're pulling down 38 grand a year. It doesn't help you very much in New York City. I believe the average rent would cost you like 42 or 43 grand a year. Hardly a living wage in New York City. I think you probably should give your snow shovelers a bump. Now, I get it. They're not going to be shoveling snow all the time. They don't have winter storms there 12 months a year, but $19 an hour? Kind of going off a little bit cheap there. And also, it's funny because to be eligible, you have to present photo ID and social security card and be eligible to work, not be an illegal alien. And this is coming from leaders like Zoran Mamdani, who are saying that if you require an ID to vote, that's somehow Jim Crow 2.0. All right. Now, the people being the problem, New York City, no exception to that. But I think the polling data indicates that nationwide it is a problem, and we're just failing to connect the dots. We can't afford to live, but we still want the government to spend money, which in essence is a dog chasing its tail. It's a death spiral because it makes it harder for us to live. And because the people are the problem and they fail to do just basic reasoning and thinking through, they're feeling the squeeze. How bad are they feeling the squeeze? Well, what if you're not living in New York where you have to use public transportation? God forbid you have your own vehicle there. You live in the rest of the country, you do need a vehicle to get around. And as an aside, guys, update, I did get a new vehicle. I got the same vehicle I had, a 2024 Camry. Sorry, didn't buy American, but the last one resulted in my son not dying in an accident. So they got my dollars this time. Now it's just a question of whether the insurance company wants to pay for it. But back to our purposes today, people being the problem. Saw this from the Washington Post: because democracy dies in darkness. Headline reads, why is it becoming so expensive to buy a car in America? Now, the average price for a new car is above $50,000 in this country. The average monthly payment, $800, but a sizable portion of people are paying over $1,000 a month. You'd have to shovel a lot of snow to pay for that. This is because of the K-shaped economy, partly. So a K-shaped economy, if you think about the letter K, it's got one leg going up, one leg going down. And that means that the upper class are doing really well and the middle and the lower classes are not doing well. And that's largely because of inflation. I keep going back to inflation, but let's think it through. I mean, it doesn't really affect the rich to have inflation on core essentials as much as it affects the middle class and the poor. Why? Because you can only eat a certain amount of food, right? I mean, you go to the store and you can eat some duck à l'orange and arugula like your Barack Obama, but really like the core essentials, meat and potatoes if you're in America, bread, eggs, and milk. The heightened prices to that don't impact the upper class very much because they have enough accrued wealth. It hits the middle class and the lower class more because it's a greater overall percentage of your income. So you really feel the squeeze more. But because there's more disposable income, in a large part because we have so many more dollars now floating around that have hit the coffers of the wealthy because they're invested in things like the stock market that have been artificially boosted by inflation, they have the ability to go out there and buy cars. So most of the buying right now that is going on with cars is being kept at a stable high level, $50,000 for a new car, because there's still a demand from the upper class. So I saw the stat, it was buyers with household incomes above $150,000. So roughly double the average American salary, household. They are 3 in every 10 car purchases. So they're continuing to buy the vehicles, which means that there's a steady demand for the vehicles, which means that those prices aren't going to come back down anytime soon. And on top of that, we've had some tariffs over the last year or so. And for a while, the car companies have been absorbing those because they're still able to sell the cars at a profit. But they're going to have to jack the prices up if tariffs remain, which means that, again, the prices are going to go up. Who's going to be able to afford it? It's not going to be the middle class and the lower class. And again, all of this is tied to approval of tariffs without actually thinking it through, and approval of government spending. Government spending after they've taxed it from individuals, citizens, and more likely printed it out of nowhere and made dollars not worth as much. And still, Americans want more and more government spending. And we take the messaging and we say things are going great. Sure, we still have to go buy that yellow tag beef, but we have disinflation now. We feel just so good about it. Now, that's enough on the economic stuff. I want to talk about some personnel problems. The people being the problem at a citizen level, that also at a government actor level, and not just in the leadership, even though this is the leadership making this call, is going to affect up and down the ranks. What the heck are you talking about, Steve? Let's go to the ex-girlfriend, because I saw this coming out of Reuters last week, and I had to share it with you all here on the American Radicals podcast. From Reuters, headline, exclusive: FBI plans to reduce vetting of some applying to be agents, sources say. Direct quote, not very long. FBI Director Kash Patel, who was in Milan over the weekend celebrating with the United States hockey team. Good for him at a taxpayer-funded vacation. He's expected to eliminate a requirement that support staff already working in the FBI who apply to become special agents sit for an interview and complete a writing assessment. All right. Now for some inside baseball, guys. This is why you come to the AmRad pod. Sit for an interview and a writing assessment. Reuters doesn't know this. This is actually called phase 2 of the hiring process. This is the thing that gets the most people kicked out of the process to become an applicant to a special agent. Because once you've made it through the entire process, like 98% of people make it through the actual training at Quantico. It's not Navy SEALs BUDS training. It's a professional learning environment. They've already invested a ton of money and time into you at that point. They want to push you through the process. The big hurdle for most people joining the FBI, if you have the requisite amount of experience that's required, I mean, if you have law enforcement, military experience, you're a lawyer, you have those core backgrounds, and now you're eligible to apply. And you can pass a background check because you're not a felon. You can pass a drug test. If you can pass a pretty easy physical fitness test. I mean, those do weed out people. But the biggest one is called phase 2. In fact, it's an interagency rivalry joke between FBI and DEA, where FBI agents say, I passed phase 2. That's why I'm not in the DEA. Because they're 1811s, just like special agents, right? They're supposed to have the same core skill set, but they couldn't make it through phase 2. Now, phase 2 is an interview, and it is a written assessment. My experience was not dissimilar from anybody else over a decade ago, and from what I understand, it's basically the same now, except for the onboarding people, as Kash Patel will bring them in, and we'll touch on why he might be doing that in a minute. But what is phase 2? They fly you somewhere that's out of your area. You go and take a written test, the written test being like a scenario. You're a brand new agent. They hand you a case file and they say, hey, look at this case file and make a recommendation of, do you think we should shut this case down? Or do you think that we should pursue it further? And if you want to pursue it further, what sort of recommendations would you make? Now, if you have any modicum of test-taking ability, you know that you have to say, we're going to continue this investigation. They would never give you a fictional investigation for you to say, no, we're done here. They want to see how you write, how you think, where your brain's at. So it's hardly a question of which option you're going to go with. There were people who took phase 2 with me who got out and said to me, yeah, I recommended that we don't do anything. In fact, I had one guy say to me, I didn't write anything at all. I couldn't come up with an answer. This is why it's necessary, because there are unqualified people who have made it through the prior stages who need to be fleshed out and vetted and not given a gun and badge and credentials from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But we're going to keep doing that. Now, the interview portion, you sit down with 3 people, 3 agents from various parts of the country, and they ask you these questions, and they make you think. They actually keep you on your toes. It's a difficult interview. They make you go into the recesses of your brain because you don't come in with any preparation. They make you think about things, about scenarios and things that happened to you decades ago. Tell us about a time when you were working in a group dynamic and the entire group disagreed with you and you were able to convince the entire group to come to your side, and then your recommendation was successful. Ready, set, go. That's hard. But that's going to be done away with. In fact, I know an agent who does that, and he says that people come in not even wearing a shirt and tie. They're going out like they're on the town, going to the club. It's a good way to vet people. Why are we going to do away with that? Well, because it's going to be limited, Steve. Hey, AmRads, don't worry. It's already people we've done a background check on, their support staff. They know how the way the FBI works. They'll be great. We're going to have way less of a learning curve for them. Or there are people who are support staff who have spent their entire career working for the FBI are, again, boiled frogs. people who are the problem, who can't come in from the outside and realize that what's always gone on, because it's always gone on, might be a problem. The antiquity of error is no justification for its perpetuity. Or people who they might have compromising information on, people who maybe have some extramarital difficulties or have slipped and fell a couple of times in the past. And do you really want to throw the flag on what we're doing now? We know so much about you. Do you just want to follow orders? The people are the problem, and this is the policy change that is going to ensure that that continues. All right, I got one more I want to get to because it's been pretty dark today. I got problems with people who are in government, people who are spinning on behalf of government, like the Dan Bongino's of the world, people who want to become further part of government or ascend the ladder, and the people who are just willing to accept it whole cloth and just drink that down and wave pom-poms, drink the Kool-Aid, feel awesome. Let's go to a situation where the person was the corrective action. And I saw this from Zeal, which is one of the sub-agencies, a subsidiary of Catholic Vote, and it's about a cop who's not likely to go to work for the FBI because he did some real cop stuff. Headline: Off-duty officer detains armed man who attempted to enter Sacramento Catholic school mass. All right. We have, according to police, this officer saw this guy, Brian Girardot. I don't know. It's kind of hard to pronounce. I'll call him Brian. He's a piece of trash. Brian approached the church, asked to go inside, and spoke. And so the officer winds up speaking to this guy, and in the course of talking to him, discovers that he has a loaded handgun. And this is supposed to be a gun-free zone. It's a school. This was an Ash Wednesday mass just for students. St. Mary Parish said that the all-school mass for students happened at 9:30 in the morning. The church doors were locked. Parent observers located outside and inside of the church because they were handling security themselves, not waiting on the daddy government. This off-duty officer was there in his private capacity, not as a representative from the Sacramento Police Department. Now, our bad guy, Brian, had more ammunition and a camouflage jacket in his car that was parked near the school. They later did a search warrant and found handwritten notes that said he was going to do some suicide and threats, and he was interdicted by an off-duty cop who was just doing security at his kid's school. That's what it's about. Taking some initiative in your own community. I'm not saying you got to stop an active shooter from happening, but wouldn't hurt you to maybe volunteer every now and then at your kid's school. Head on down to the school board, make sure the communists aren't putting pornography on the school library shelves or teaching material to Harry in 3rd grade, telling him he can become Sally. You could shovel the snow in your own driveway and the part that touches the sidewalk that's technically city property. Shoot, you could help your neighbor shovel the snow in his yard because maybe your neighbor is an elderly lady who shouldn't be out there in the cold. The people are the problem when we allow our own way of life to be dictated by an out of control government that convinces us that it should be the arbiter of what is right and wrong and what needs to be done and how it should be done. Or we could pursue things the way that they ought to be in the country, where we are that arbiter, where we don't dispense responsibilities that we should take up on our own. We don't empower the government to do those things that we should do for ourselves, because every time you do that, you give an inch. They don't just take a mile. They take the entire circumference of the globe and they put you into the pauper's grave as a result of it, because it ain't free, guys. They're going to continue forever to coin that money because they're a bureaucracy, a self-licking ice cream cone, justifying their existence. And they will find the appropriate messengers to go out there and give them the accolades in the hope that you don't notice how they maybe have an ulterior agenda. All right. So we've reached the end of the AMRAD pod for the day, guys. But I won't leave you without a nice palate cleanse. And I saw this completely unrelated. It's a kind of conspiratorial, weird connections between two presidents, Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy. This was something that Joe Rogan actually brought. And the more I looked at it, the more I kind of went, huh, that's really weird. It's a fun one. Today's Pallet Cleanse.
This is the largest coincidence in history. See if your history teacher can explain this. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Both were particularly concerned with civil rights. Both wives lost a child while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both presidents were shot in the head. Now, it gets really weird. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln, was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated Kennedy, was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by their three names. Both names are composed of 15 letters. Now hang on to your seat. Lincoln was shot at a theater named Ford. Kennedy was shot in a car called Lincoln, made by Ford. Booth and Oswald were assassinated before their trials. And here's the kicker. A week before Lincoln was shot, he was in Monroe, Maryland. A week before Kennedy was shot, he was with Marilyn Monroe. Lincoln was shot in a theater, and the assassin ran to a warehouse. Kennedy was shot from a warehouse, and the assassin ran to a theater.
Whoa. Some of that stuff out there, guys, is really bizarre, coincidental, conspiratorial. I don't know, but either way, it's pretty fun. All right. That's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Back with you tomorrow, noontime, here on YouTube and on Rumble. And if you haven't already, guys, make sure you give us a nice thumbs up, subscribe, follow, all those sorts of things that help us grow out the brand here. And until tomorrow, noontime, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.